Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Adam, alcoholic. First of all, I'd like to thank you for your hospitality and asking me to speak. It's an honor and a privilege to be asked to participate in Alcoholics Anonymous. Ultimately, it's a responsibility to give back what was so freely given to me. And I'd like to welcome anybody that's new. If you're trying Alcoholics Anonymous one more time, if perhaps you think this maybe won't work for you, I recycled in and out of the rooms for about 17 years. I mean, I had so many chips I could have played poker with them. It was ridiculous. And I don't mean to be funny, but it was ridiculous. And you know, I know people were judging me. You know, they say don't judge anybody in AA. You ever hear that? 5 minutes later, they're telling you to stick with the winners. And you know, I mean, I did that walk of shame over and over and over again. And what I would do is I would go into your head and look back at myself and think, what a loser. Why can't you get this? And you know, there was so much guilt and shame about that. And you know, you don't see a lot of people drunk in AA these days with the event of treatment, which swoops us up in our most desperate moments. But you know, I showed up in meetings drunk for about a decade. And you know what I would do, I live in LA, and we have these late night meetings, 11, 12 o'clock. I know you have them here. I've already been to both of your Alano clubs. And I'd go to 7-Eleven, get a big gulp cup, fill it up with liquor. I'd go to late night and do some of my best sharing. You know, they weren't laughing. And you know, I did that over and over again. Eventually, I started going through treatment centers. And, you know, this is not a plug for treatment, but by the time I finally got sober, I went through treatment 28 times. Now, I remember telling my sponsor I went through treatment 28 times. You know, I was hoping that would get rid of the guy. And he looked me right in the eye and he says, "It doesn't make you an alcoholic." And I thought, "You're kidding." He says, "No, it means you paid $500,000 for a big book." He was brutal. You know, they say if you baby the alcoholic, you'll bury him. You know, and I thank God that he told me the truth. And, you know, he also told me I should get a black suit. And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, you're going to go to a lot of funerals. And if you drink again, we'll bury you in it." And, you know, for me, this became a matter of life and death. It may or may not be a matter of life and death for you, but I got to that point where, see, the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous swung both ways for me for years, in and out, and you know, I could do the weekend warrior thing, and it's slowly, like everybody's story. It was fun with problems, and then it was just problems. And, you know, eventually I couldn't get back here. Eventually I was drinking in treatment, you know, and I just couldn't stop. And, you know, I'm not going to start citing pages out of the big book today, but page 101 of the big book says any scheme that attempts to shield the alcoholic from temptation is doomed to failure. See, treatment was a great place to fatten me up for another run, but it never solved the problem. And I thought the problem was alcohol. And a guy said to me, if that little drink, that little bottle of Jack Daniels, if that's your problem, you're probably not an alcoholic. And he said to me in the very next breath, if you're a real alcoholic, the type that's described in the doctor's opinion of Alcoholics Anonymous, your problem isn't alcohol. And you know, for the life of me, it took me another 10 years to understand what he was telling me. I couldn't live with booze, but the greater reality for me is I couldn't live without it. You know, it was as clear as a bell to everyone that I grew up with that I couldn't live with alcohol. You know, I never saw it when I was, behind the ball box, drinking in like 7th grade, that I was going to end up in a nightgown with my butt hanging out, 20 years later. With the DTs, I never saw that coming. I never saw it coming when I was in 5th grade and, I broke up with that first girlfriend and I had a couple of drinks and I said, screw her, I didn't love her. Or my parents were in the middle of a divorce and I had a couple more drinks and I said, I don't need them, I'll live on the roof. A normal guy breaks down on the freeway, he calls a tow truck. I call suicide prevention. Because I never went through the experiential learning process that most adolescents grow through. I drank through puberty. I missed it. And so the worst 2 years for me, like a lot of us, was my last year out there because I had to get to that bottom, that pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization that we talk about, and the first year sober because I had to grow up. Unfortunately for me, I did those 2 years for about 17. So, we're going to talk about purgatory today. Which in my experience is a fate worse than death. And, a friend of mine said this is like a train, and it only goes to one place. It goes to jails, institutions, and death. That's the only place it goes. We happen to be at a station right now. But my reality is I can't stay off that train. That I will drink again if I don't follow some simple rules that I found in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I wasn't teachable. I just couldn't hear the message. I was in one more detox, dying of alcoholism. I was 120 pounds. I was lost. I was in that hopeless state again. I was dirty. I'd let everybody down one more time. Remember that great feeling in the detox circle with your fellow associates? A vision for you? And I'm sitting there in the circle, and this woman from AA comes in her business suit. She's on her H&I panel, one of Clancy's crew. And at the end of her talk, she says, if I could give you all the gift of recovery, I wouldn't do it. And I remember looking at her, and I looked at the guy next to me, and I said, what a bitch. And what she said was, the reason I wouldn't give you the gift of recovery is because I wouldn't rob you of the journey. And all of these years later, I understand that journey to recovery, very much like that journey to surrender, is personal. I can't transmit that intangible gift of desperation to anybody in this room. I've seen some of the most dearest friends of mine, including family, die of this disease, drink in hand, because they couldn't see that. Denial. Don't even notice I am lying. And that's my alcoholic mind. I have a mind that'll argue with anybody about anything at any time. You tell me it's black, I'll tell you it's white. You tell me to go left, I'll go right with an attitude. And like a lot of us, I had to be beaten into a state of reasonableness. And that gift of desperation, as I understand it today, that's the cover charge for Alcoholics Anonymous. It's like the disease killed me every day and it wouldn't bury me. So here I am in purgatory in this fate worse than death. Can't live with it, can't live without it. Sitting in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and hearing stuff like, don't drink no matter what. And I'm throwing chairs across meetings. So I've come to understand that Alcoholics Anonymous is a spiritual solution to what I know now is a spiritual problem. And it wasn't just alcohol. We could talk all day long about what gets us into these rooms, and I love a good war story. I miss them once in a while. But I think it's more important to talk about what keeps us here. And, that gift of desperation, that cover charge for Alcoholics Anonymous had to be in place. This is the most expensive club in the world if you're a real drunk. Because it took everything. And until I'd beaten down that liquor store door where I live, you can't drink after 2 a.m. You can't buy liquor. So, I'm paying $100 for a 6-pack at 1:59 a.m., you know. Then I found out that, you know, you could rent a limo and get to the bar, you know, or drive to Vegas or Mexico. And now I found out you can just go to, like, your local supermarket and buy a Robitussin. It's full of alcohol. I didn't have to go. So if you decide on going out, there's a tip for you. You know, but until I'd done all that, until I'd beaten down that liquor store door at, you know, 5:59 a.m., or done some of the despicable, diabolical, disgusting things that a lot of us do, like peed in my brand new girlfriend's underwear drawer, thinking it was a bathroom, you know, or puked all over my best friend's car, or, you know, some of the things that we do. I mean, I could write all day long on step one. It meant nothing to me. You know, what I've come to terms with as an alcoholic is hope doesn't mean anything to me until I become absolutely hopeless. Until self-reliance had absolutely failed me. You know, now I'm a guy, you know, being an alumni from everywhere, I do a lot of H&I. We have H&I, which is hospitals and institutions. We take meetings into, like, prisons and detoxes and treatment centers. And, you know, I have this panel up at the VA, which is the Veterans Administration, and we start talking to, you know, a room full of soldiers about surrender. You know, believe me, the room gets quiet, especially Marines. But, you know, out of that experience, one of the greatest illustrations of surrender that I ever heard in Alcoholics Anonymous. You ever watch a soldier surrender? The illustration's perfect. You'll see him take the rifle, lay it down on the ground, sit down on the side of the road, and wait for someone to tell him what to do. When you got 48 K-47s pointed at your head, you don't throw down the gun with an attitude, right? You're not sitting on the side of the road looking back at the gun, because if you do, someone's going to shoot you. Am I looking back at alcohol? Am I looking back at that bottle? See, because life has its moments, and for those moments, I will give my life trying to recapture and recreate the magic that I found in alcohol. And I'd been in Alcoholics Anonymous behind compliance for years. Dr. Harry Tebow, who's one of the contributing members to some of our original literature, talks about the difference between compliance and surrender. You can look him up on the internet. And, you know, compliance is a completely different concept. It's cooperation without agreement. And I'd been in Alcoholics Anonymous for years behind that concept. Doing it for sober living, doing it for the judicial system, doing it for family services, doing it for the parole offices. I mean, there's a million forms of compliance. Where I live, they do it for the trust fund. That goes over good in Beverly Hills. But surrender, that unconditional act of surrender, is a completely different concept. And until I got to that place, I couldn't hear the solution. Nor could I contend with what we call the common problem here. You know, and like, you know, I think Scott R. talks about, you know, you go into meetings of AA these days and you got alcoholics, you got alcoholic addicts, then you got addict alcoholics that are somehow different, right? Of course, you got the dope fiends in the back row that are worse than all of us. You know, and if we don't have a common problem, we don't have a common solution. There's like 400 12-step programs. They're all identical except for the first half of step one. We can play musical poisons in the first half of step one all day long and never really understand what the spiritual problem is. And I'd done it for years. You know, and eventually I had to get some clarity on what that common problem is. As a real alcoholic, I had to come to terms with the fact that for me, things like fear won't keep me sober. Now, we talk about the problem drinker. That's someone that can stop or moderate given sufficient reason. Fear won't keep me sober. Getting a third strike, living on the street, being homeless, losing my career, losing my family, throwing my education down the drain. Did scared straight work for you guys? Right over my head. Now, the problem drinker, you get a problem drinker and a real alcoholic in a drunk tank for, say, drunk driving, you got two completely different philosophies going on, right? You got the problem drinker on one side of the cell thinking, why did I drink so much last night? I knew I shouldn't have drank so much. Real alcoholics on the other side of the cell thinking, why'd I take Virginia Avenue? Should have took 4th Street or something. Compliance. Problem drinker's wife says, honey, if you don't stop drinking, I'm leaving you. Problem drinker cleans up his act, doesn't drink in the house, gets a little Visine. If my woman says, honey, if you don't stop drinking, I'm leaving you, you know what I'm thinking, right? I'm thinking about single life. Now, Al-Anons don't laugh at stuff like that. They can't stand to see us have fun. I'll keep the Al-Anon jokes to myself. But you know, fear wouldn't keep me sober. And there's a big difference between admitting I'm an alcoholic and truly accepting it. I could admit it in junior high school. But to really go through that evolutionary process to understand and accept that I'm an alcoholic, that I'm bodily and mentally different from my fellows, was a completely different concept. That 18 inches from my head to my heart was like a trip around the world. And you know, the saddest thing is talking about that journey to surrender. You know, I mean, I wish I could have given that to some of those people that I saw die. You know, when you go through treatment a lot of times, you see a lot of people die. And, you know, I'll be forever grateful to Alcoholics Anonymous for a solution. And it wasn't not drinking. A guy said to me, AA is not about not drinking. He said, county jail's about not drinking. This is about learning to live sober. This is learning to have a life that works so that I find the grace not to drink. You know, no one ever talks about the 10th-step promises. We always talk about the 9th-step promises. But, you know, it was brought to my attention the 10th-step promises, where sanity will have returned, where you recoil as if from a hot flame, where it talks about the problem has been removed. I mean, that's strong language. It does not exist for us. That was the freedom that I ultimately found by taking the steps and by living in the center of that triangle and taking action. And, you know, I'd been around AA for years. You know, big difference between being around Alcoholics Anonymous and actually being in AA. It's kind of like the difference between being on a submarine or in a submarine. Now, when the ship takes a dive, you'll find out if you're in or on AA. You know, catch one of your sponsees in bed with your girlfriend. Find out, you know, what kind of program you got. Oh, you think that can't happen? You know, find out your mom's got cancer, or you do, or, you know, when it really hits the fan, then I found out. Then I got to take all this theory that I'd learned in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and apply it to my life. And then I found out it really worked. And that's really the difference between faith and trust. And that was a long road. You know, knowledge won't fix me. You know, I'd had every relapse prevention class known to man. You know, when you go through treatment 28 times, I heard it all. You know, learned all about my triggers, relapse prevention. You know, I'm sitting there in the relapse prevention class talking about triggers with my counselor. And I put my hand up and I say, honey, waking up's a trigger for me. That was the end of our class. I was asked to leave. Because that's the reality of it for me. And there I am one more time behind a dumpster on Skid Row, drooling on myself, reciting chapter 5 out of the big book. And the bum next to me is like, will you shut up, bro? You're ruining my high. And I'm crying because I can't get back here. I got a belly full of booze, a head full of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm separate, different, and alone one more time. which could be as equally as painful as being in Alcoholics Anonymous and not working the 12 steps. Coming to meetings late, leaving early, not being of service, not having commitments. You know? Well, we should really welcome the guy in his last 30 days. No one ever addresses him. He's always someone in their last 30 days. You know, I remember what it's like to be, you know, in AA, or think I am, and make a decision to drink. And it was over for me. As soon as I make a decision to drink, I'm puking before I get to the liquor store. Once I've made that decision, it's over. You think I'm going to call my sponsor at that point? It's the last guy I'm going to call. How do I get to a place? Because all my life, that was all there was. I was one decision away from being drunk. And because of Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a whole world of recovery between me and that decision. A power greater than myself, a group of people whom I've come to love, sponsees, a sponsor, commitment, responsibility, service. You know, integrity. What's that? That's what I'm doing when no one's looking. You know, and I learned that around here. My friend said it was like being on a merry-go-round. You know, the merry-go-round starts spinning. If you're on the outside of that merry-go-round, all you have to do is let go. No one's even going to notice. And not that any human power is going to solve my problem, but being in the middle of that merry-go-round made a world of difference to me. Because when people would say, how you doing? I'd say, fine. They'd say, well, why don't you tell your face that? I mean, they knew me. Because I became willing to take actions in Alcoholics Anonymous that I didn't believe in. Including being a greeter and shaking people's hands, even when I hated people. You know, hi, my name's Adam. When I'm really saying, I hope you die. You know, I'm not a people person. I don't love people. You know, I didn't come in here like that. A lot of people drank because they wanted to fit in. I drank, I wanted to get away from everybody. Alcohol was my best friend. And it served me well until it didn't. Knowledge. I told my sponsor I had a degree when I came to AA. And you know what he said? He said, thermometers have degrees. You know where they stick those? He wasn't impressed. See, the knowledge is necessary for me to win the confidence of a newcomer, where the clergy couldn't do it, where the therapist couldn't do it, where the drug and alcohol counselor couldn't do it. Another drunk was able to win my confidence because he lived like me. Not just out there drinking, but he lived like me in untreated alcoholism. And then he was able to, armed with certain facts about himself, share a common solution to this spiritual malady. And he was able to win my confidence. You know, you hear people say, oh, just think it through. Just play the tape through. Now, I'm playing the tape through. I'm in my new car driving down the 10 freeway past downtown, and I play the tape through to Skid Row, and you know what my head tells me? Skid Row wasn't that bad. Give me a cardboard box and a toothless honey, I can make it out there. I got an ATM card. See, that sounds like Disneyland to me. Playing the tape through doesn't work for me. And that's the rare type of insanity that we talk about as alcoholics. Normal people don't laugh at stuff like that. See, insanity to me, you hear what insanity's doing the same thing and expecting different results. Isn't that what you hear around here? That's not the insanity I deal with. The insanity I deal with is doing the same thing, knowing exactly what's going to happen, and doing it anyway. Now, I don't want to offend any of the tender ears today, but it's kind of like having sex with a gorilla. Now, if you have sex with a gorilla, it ain't over till the gorilla says it's over. It's like a sadistic lover, right? Baby, I promise I won't hurt you this time. It'll be like it used to be. Remember? Hey, just me and you. I promise I won't tell anybody. Nobody's going to know. See, that's the insanity of alcoholism, that it'll lie to me, and then I'll step over here and believe the lie. I live in a world of delusion. That's the insanity I deal with. It reminds me of this guy. He gets a rifle for his birthday, and his lifelong ambition was to kill a polar bear. So, he takes his rifle, it's his birthday, goes to Alaska, sees a polar bear, takes his shot, goes over to check out his kill, tap on his shoulder. Bigger polar bear, looking down at him. You just shot my son. You got two choices. You either let me have my way with you, or I'm going to maul you to death. A couple weeks later, he's healing up in the hospital. Now he's got a resentment. He's going to go get this polar bear. So, he back on the plane, goes up there, sees the bear, takes his shot, goes over to check out his kill. Another tap on his shoulder. Bigger polar bear. He just shot my uncle. You got two choices. You let me have my way with you, or I'm going to maul you to death. Back in the hospital, healing up again. This goes on and on for years, back and forth. Finally, he's up there. He's got the biggest polar bear he's ever seen. He's sure it's the one. He takes his shot. He goes over to check out his kill. King of the polar bears, looking down at him. Says, we've been watching you. You're really not up here for the hunting, are you? Now go home and read The Jaywalker.
Yeah.
Because that's the jaywalker. And that's the insanity that I deal with as an alcoholic. Because, behind this spiritual malady is that obsession. Behind that obsession is the allergy. And eventually I had to look at it. I wasn't doing that to have fun. I thought I was. But everybody could see me dying. I looked like I was, just fresh out of a concentration camp. I wasn't having fun. I was in the middle of a spiritual disease, and I was dying of this thing. It, like I said before, it killed me every day, and it wouldn't bury me. That's what it means to be a real alcoholic for me. And there's no human power that can solve that problem. Including just commitments. I made coffee for a year drunk, and they let me do it. And there's nothing I could do to stop myself from picking up that drink. And that's a pretty dark place to be. To know that I will drink again. They say stuff like, don't drink no matter what, and I know they mean well. And I said, well, why don't you join Nancy Reagan's Merry Band of Winners and just say no? I drink no matter what. I'd never read the 3rd chapter. People said that, and they mean well. When they say don't drink no matter what today, what I hear is get commitments no matter what. Have a sponsor no matter what. Work the steps no matter what. Be of service no matter what. Because powerless doesn't mean I can't drink. Powerless absolutely means that I will drink again. That I have no effective mental defense against the first drink. And I can't think my way out of that. That the consequences of a week or a month ago are insufficient to keep me sober. It's really not that deep. They're just saying you never took your first drink drunk. When you get hit by a train, it ain't the caboose that kills you. It's the engine. And it took a long time for me to get any clarity on that. That I will drink again. Unless I'm willing to take actions in Alcoholics Anonymous that I don't believe in. And if you're new, that's what I was asked to do. I was asked to set aside everything I thought I knew about AA, about the 12 steps, about God, so I could have a new experience with this thing. And when I truly became open-minded, like it says, a lot of remarkable things started to happen for me. You know, there's a lot of people that come into AA, they drank exactly like I did, guys I grew up with, you know, and they did all the despicable things I did. They had the phenomenon of craving, but like the doctor's opinion said, they were normal in every respect except the effect produced by alcohol. And that guy comes into AA, and as soon as he puts the drink down, everything works for him. He fits in, the career welcomes him back. He comes to meeting once a year, never works a step, and his life gets consistently better. He's been serene since his ass hit the seat in AA. That's not my experience. My experience, every time I put down the drink, the first thing they say to me is, boy, you need to be on medication. Why are you so angry? Why are you so emotional? How come you can't sit still back there? What's wrong with you? And I'm crying at dog food commercials. When I'm not drinking, I have a whole nother set of problems. They're outlined on page 52. When I'm not drinking, I'm a prey to misery and depression. When I'm not drinking, I can't control my emotional nature. When I'm not drinking, I can't manage my personal relationships. Sound familiar? When I'm not drinking, I'm of no use to other people. When I'm not drinking, I'm basically unhappy. When I'm not drinking, I'm full of fear. That's untreated alcoholism. And the way that plays out for me in abstinence, in untreated alcoholism, is that I don't fit in, I'm not part of, you don't understand me, everybody's in my way, life doesn't treat me right, they don't appreciate me, I'm not getting paid enough, she's cheating on me, I gotta drink. And as soon as I pick up a cocktail, you know what happens? As soon as I pick up a drink, I intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle me. Drink and dial, baby. Give me 3 or 4 more drinks, fear of people and economic insecurity leave me, I'm buying the whole bar drinks. Hell, I'll write you a check. Not only am I getting better looking, honey, you're getting better looking. Give me a couple Vicodin and I could comprehend the word serenity and I know peace. Give me a little cocaine, I want to start a business with you. Get me down to my last $20, I'll show you how my experience will benefit others. Now, if you think any of that's funny, there's something really wrong with you guys. See, normal people don't laugh at that stuff. That's not funny. Because that's the effect produced by alcohol. Normal person drinks, it goes, I drink and it goes boom. I want to get married. I want to go on vacation. I want to find the car keys I hid before I had the first drink. So I knew I was going to drive. You know, my sponsor said to me, he said, you know, if you look at the 12 promises, the 9-step promises, at the end of the promises, what it says is we suddenly realized that God could do for us what we could not do for ourselves. And he said to me, if you're a real alcoholic, plug in alcohol. Didn't some of us suddenly realize that alcohol had done for us what we could not do for ourselves? We're not talking about in the last 5 years when you were crawling around in vomit. But the magic, because life has its moments, like I said, and for those moments, I'm willing to give my life to recapture and recreate that magic that I found in alcohol when it worked. He said by substitution, plug alcohol. Didn't we suddenly realize that alcohol had done for us what we could not do for ourselves? You know, when I really looked at it, I had to admit it. He was right. And he said to me, if that's true, then there's a relationship between God and alcohol. And you can see it by substitution in the promises.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think.
He said, you know, if you get into the ghettos in this country, it's clear as a bell. There's only two things that stick out: churches and liquor stores. You know why? Because they both give man hope. Carl Jung, in a letter to Bill Wilson relating spirits, the Latin root to spirituality, says it exactly. That for people like me, alcohol is an artificial means to a spiritual experience. These 12 simple steps are a practical means to a spiritual experience. You take the booze away from me, you don't give me something better, you think I'm going to sit in these rooms and not drink no matter what? Not a chance. I'm throwing chairs across meetings when I'm not drinking no matter what. I'm chasing you 4 exits past my exit on the freeway when I'm not drinking no matter what. Jumping up and down on your hood in traffic. I'm counting your items in the checkout line. We got some item counters here? That figures. See, it was alcohol that gave me the courage to ask that beautiful girl out. It was alcohol that gave me the guts to go after that big job, to go after that audition. It was alcohol that gave me the wings to fly. And unless I can find that sense of comfort and ease that I sought from alcohol through this process, there's no way I'm going to stay here and spiritually deteriorate in these rooms. They don't say having had a spiritual awakening as a result of sitting in these seats. I thought it would rub off on me. I thought if I dated a girl with a bunch of time, it might work. You know, every imaginable remedy. You know, you want to hide something from a newcomer, you know where to put it, right? Stick it in the literature. They'll never find it. There's only one thing people like us do in moderation. You know what it is? The steps. That's really, you wouldn't laugh at that if it was your mom, though, or your dad, or someone that you love dying. You know, and I know it's funny, but it is funny. But at the same time, it's a tragedy. You know, there's a pamphlet, Problems Other Than Alcohol. It's one of the conference-approved, you know, public information pamphlets that we have. And it says problems other than alcohol. And in the first page, it says the sole purpose of an AA group is the teaching and practice of the 12 steps. You know, I go to meetings where the topic's I lost my cigarettes. You know, and I don't mean to be offensive, but it's true. You know, it's like sometimes I think we lose sight of what we're doing here. This is a matter of life and death for me. And eventually I came to terms with what the real problem was. Chuck C said it better than anybody. He said the real problem here isn't alcohol. He said the real problem here is a conscious separation from God. And then he pointed to the 11th step where it talks about the solution, conscious contact with God. And the bridge for me from 2 to 11 was steps 4 through 9. Maybe what they should say is rarely have we seen a person fail that's done steps 4 through 9. Rarely have we ever seen anybody do 4 through 9. I do what's called the AA waltz. 1, 2, 3, drink. 1, 2, 3, drink. 1. I'll turn my will and life over to anything but that which will solve the problem. You know, and he was talking about a conscious separation from God. Now, we have a chapter in our book, We Agnostics. You notice we don't have a chapter, We Believers, right? You know, and I started to look at what those questions were, because all of my life I had a certain belief system when it came to this power. You know, I had been brought up with a punishing God, with a condemning God, with a God that was, you know, professed by a lot of these organized religions. And, you know, I had to really look at that. You think I wanted to pray? I didn't want God to find out where I was. That's a conscious separation from God. And I had all these conditional relationships, like you get in a closet and pray for a hot dog, guess what? You'll die. God can move mountains, but you better bring a shovel. You know, or I had believed in a Santa Claus God. If I'm good, I'm going to get a reward. You know, where I live, we have parking meter gods. You know, and it's wonderful if you get a space, but what about when you don't? You know, it's like, that was a visual. But this is a belief system that I came in here with. you know, I'd look at 4 and 9 and drink, man. Like I said, you hear a lot of stuff in here that may or may not be in the book, like, oh, you know, don't make any decisions in your first year. You ever hear that? Take a look at the 3rd step. Don't get any relationships in your first year, right? No one knows if that works. No one's ever done it. So back to God. I tell my sponsees, don't pray for women. God's not a pimp. See, but I had this belief system that I had grown up with. And, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous in this process slowly chipped away at that belief system. Bobby Earl said it better than anybody. And, you know, we use the term the Eskimo around here. And that story comes from a priest and an atheist, and they're in a bar in Alaska, and the priest looks at the atheist and he says, how come you don't believe in God? And the atheist looks back at the priest and he says, well, I tried God once. And the priest says, well, what do you mean? And the atheist says, well, I was walking around in a blizzard. I was in the snow and it was dark and I knew I was going to die. I was lost. And I got on my knees and I said, God, if there's a God, help me. I'm going to die. And the priest looks him right in the eye and he says, well, you must believe in God. You're sitting here with me in the bar. You know what the atheist said? He says, you don't understand. He said, right after I got off my knees, I bumped into this Eskimo and he showed me the way back into town. So for God's sake, if you're a newcomer, find the Eskimo. And that was an evolutionary process for me. Initially, this power was a group of drunks. I found it through you. There's a poem in Notre Dame. It says, I sought my God I could not see. I sought my soul I could not free. I sought my brother, and I found all three. That's where nothing ensures immunity from alcohol more than intensive work with others. That's where I see that. And my sponsor said, if you're not willing to take people through the steps, you're going to die. He said that was the whole point of the exercise. Intimacy. Into me I see. My sponsor said the steps were like the face of a clock. When you look at 12, it's right next to 1. And when I'm in 12, I'm in 1 with a new guy. The reason the grass is greener over there, you know why? Because they're watering it. And I became willing to water that spiritual garden. For us, the road to happiness is always under construction. It's not a destination. And I became willing to face and be rid of these ideas that I had about this power. You know, I had to come to believe in a power other than myself. That alone is a huge feat for an alcoholic. Especially when self-reliance works so well in business. Or, you know, in other aspects of my life where when it comes to drinking, it's absolutely useless. You know, I just couldn't think my way out of this. You know, and I had to start to make some decisions. All my decisions had been based on self to that point. You know, and I'd been in conflict and collision with everybody and everything. You know, that's why Wilson talks about me being the actor, forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and all the players. If only people would stay put, they would do as I wished, life would be wonderful. It reminds me of this ship that's out on the ocean at night, and there's a light on the horizon, so the helmsman, he's the guy that steers the ship, he gets on the bridge, and he radios to this light, and he says, turn your course 10 degrees to the north. A couple seconds later, there's a reply, no, you turn your course 10 degrees to the south. You know, the light's getting closer and closer, and they start panicking, and they get back on the radio. Turn your course 10 degrees to the north. And the reply again is, you turn your course 10 degrees to the south. So, you know, the captain gets on the ship, and he says, I'm the captain of this ship. We demand you turn your course 10 degrees to the north. And the reply is, I'm a seaman. So what? You turn your course 10 degrees to the south. And they're arguing back and forth. Finally, the final radio address is, I am a captain of this ship. We are a battleship. We demand you turn your course 10 degrees to the north. And the final reply is, I'm a lighthouse. You know, and all of my life being in collision with everybody and everything, I just couldn't see that God's will is constant. Like that lighthouse, it is constant. Until I could come to terms with that, I couldn't be happy. And we talk about the proper use of the will. And I think that's probably where I got the most freedom here, was aligning that will with this power, you know, which I didn't understand, which I didn't want to pray to, which I rarely, if ever, believed in. And, you know, I had to take a look at that. You know, we talk about, you know, 3 birds are on a wire, one decides to fly away. How many are left? Exactly. Because I never took the action subsequent to that decision. You know, it's kind of like the difference between faith and trust. If there was a high wire across this room, you know, and say since we're in circus, a tightrope walker comes walking across the high wire, pushing, for example, a wheelbarrow, you know, we'd all sit down there and we'll think, well, he'll probably make it. That's faith. You know what trust is? You go get in the wheelbarrow. Completely different concept. And that wheelbarrow, for me, was steps 4 through 9. But first I had to come to terms with that unmanageability. You know, and what that really means. And it all goes back to 1. It's like if I'm stuck in 9, problem's never in 9. Problem's really that I never made the list in 8. Or became willing. Problem's in 8, it's never in 8. Problem's in 7. Too selfish to make the amends? Too dishonest to admit I did anything in the first place? Too afraid? Or too pissed? I'm still resentful at him. Means the problem's not in 7 at all, it's in 6, it's a defect. Right? Now if the problem's in 6, it's never in 6. It's always in 5. That I never ascertained what the trouble was. Never discovered the obstacles in my path. Never put my finger on the weak items in inventory. Why would that be? Because the problem's really in 4. Now, if the problem's in 4, you know what? Duh, it's never in 4. It's that I never made a decision in 3. Why do you think that would be? Because I never came to believe in a power other than myself in 1. Because I still thought I could manage my life. Which really comes back to what Wilson talks about. We hear it in every meeting. Our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. A, that I can't manage my life. B, that no human power, not even Clancy, can relieve my alcoholism. Now I'm thinking before and after what? It's before and after I put down a drink. See, the problem drinker comes in here and thinks the unmanageability is based on his drinking. If it is, stop drinking. Get a job. My problems begin when I stop drinking. They're just different. You know, and I have to really come to terms with what that means. To align my will with God. To face and be rid of the things in myself that are blocking me from a spiritual experience. You know, in Africa with baby elephants, what they do to train baby elephants is they chain these elephants to these huge trees. And every time the elephant tries to get away, you know, it feels the tug of the chain. It comes to believe it can't get away. It's a way to train elephants. When these elephants grow up, they grow up to be monsters. All they do is they take a little tiny rope and a little wooden stake and they tap it into the ground, and as soon as the elephant feels that tug, it stays put. Now, it's a matter of fact, there could be a fire in that jungle and that elephant will stay put. It'll die there because it believes the chain is still holding them. And that's the belief system that I have to be rid of. That's why we say, relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. See, alcoholism for me is the only prison where the key's inside. And I'll try every imaginable remedy to find a solution to that. And eventually I had to look at it like it says in the book. You know, when the spiritual maladies overcome, then we straighten out physically and mentally. That's why there's 400 12-step programs. You know, I put down the drink, I pick up the fork. You know, next thing you know, I can't see my feet. And I'm on my knees. God, please, in 6 and 7, remove this from me. Right? Then I put down the fork and pick up the credit card. I'm going to fix what I did with the fork. I'm in liposuction. Buying clothes. Then I'm in bankruptcy court on my knees. That could happen here too. And I'm in 6 and 7 again. God, please remove this from me. Then I put down the credit card and I start acting out in the rooms. Can't go to that meeting again. Can't go to that meeting again. And it's like, I can play musical poisons all day long. Resentment in Latin means to refeel. I take an event from my past, I attach emotion to it, I refeel it, I rethink it, and I relive it in every aspect of my life. My life's like Groundhog Day. Drunks identified with that movie more than anybody. That and that show Lost. And how it manifests itself is clear as a bell. Resentment. I take poison and I hope you die. See, alcoholics like me are emotion over intellect. Normal people are intellect over emotion. And unless I can have an entire psychic change in that area, I can't get free. Eventually I have to look at that. I have to find the things in myself that are blocking me, the things that are bothering me. To face and be rid of the things in myself that are blocking me from a spiritual connection. It doesn't say face and cope with, face and endure, face and whine about from the podium. To be rid of. It's kind of like if you tell a 5-year-old kid, I want you to go in your room and straighten out your room. He doesn't want to do that. You tell that same 5-year-old kid, I want you to go in your room and throw out all your old stuff and we'll buy you new stuff. How long would that take? Right? When I started to look at inventory in this process from that perspective, I started to get free. Resentment, conduct, and fear. Fear is my faulty relationship with God based on self-reliance. And conduct's my relationship with others. I was asked if I had a daughter, what kind of man would I want my daughter to marry? I've taken the most diabolical creatures through the steps, and it's always the same thing. Loving, compassionate, loyal, considerate, understanding, generous, supportive. And the first thing I say is, well, how you been treating God's daughters? And eventually I had to look at that. When they asked Michelangelo, how did you make the statue of David? Michelangelo said, I never made the statue of David. I just chipped away everything that wasn't David, and there he was. And I couldn't change. They say, well, if you don't change, your sobriety date will. But the reality is, as an alcoholic, I couldn't change. I couldn't stop drinking. How do you think I'm going to work on my defects? No way of getting rid of self without his aid. I put down the drink and all of a sudden I'm left with all this other stuff. And until I can be in the same position of pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization with gluttony and pride and lust and sloth, am I ever going to go back to God? My friend said, how much money do you need when you don't need God? There's a point. I had to find out the things that bother me. This guy comes up to his sponsor and he says, I was in a restaurant last night and I paid with a 20 and the waitress gave me change for a 50 and I don't know what to do. And the sponsor says, well, you should give the money back. The girl could lose her job. So he gives the money back. A couple days later, the sponsor and the sponsee are out having dinner. Sponsor pays with a 50. The waitress gives the sponsor change for 100. Sponsor puts it right in his pocket. They get outside the restaurant. Sponsor can't believe it. He says, I saw that. She gave you too much money. Why didn't you give it back? Sponsor looked right in the eye and he says, it bothered you. We're not saints around here. I know there's a few saints in here. Just be careful the halo doesn't choke you. It might. So, eventually I had to be rid of these things, and I couldn't do it until I got back to that place where I was, again, on my knees asking for help. I remember my mom said to me, your future lies before you like a sheet of driven snow. Be careful how you tread, for every mark will show. And I was like, You know, and 20 years later, I was in the 9th step. You know, repairing all of those footprints. You know, with a table of my enemies. And, you know, if I lived to be 100 years old, I could never pay Alcoholics Anonymous back for that freedom. You know, we talk about, you know, we had spiritual beliefs. Now we begin to have a spiritual experience. Our fears fall from us. We can look the world in the eye. That's a beautiful feeling. You know, there's promises all over the book, you know. And I couldn't find it without having a good sponsor. I couldn't find it without going to step studies. And not step studies where a bunch of newcomers would, you know, we'd read a paragraph and share what we thought it meant. I got involved with a group where we'd read something out of the big book and everybody would go home and do it and come back and share their experience with it. Completely different concept. You know, my sponsor said, "What do you want from AA?" And I said, "I want a yacht and a Learjet. I grew up in Malibu." And you know what he said to me? He said, if you work steps 4 through 9 and you consistently live in 10, 11, and 12, what you'll get is a quiet mind and a loving heart. And I remember looking at him and saying, what do I want that for? But you know what the opposite of a quiet mind is? It's a mind that won't shut up. It's that mind that's up at 3 in the morning telling you you're a loser, man. You're fat. You know that girl you're dating? She's with her ex-boyfriend while you're at this convention. You got one of those going on? You know that job you got? They're going to do the background check on you tomorrow. That's the kind of mind I have. The opposite of a loving heart is a vindictive heart. It's a prejudiced heart. It's a resentful heart. All of my life I was crucified between two thieves, yesterday and tomorrow. And yesterday I had guilt, shame, and remorse. And tomorrow I have fear, anxiety, and worry. Our spirits are like a body of water. When they're perfectly still, they best reflect the heavens. Now, I know how to get there with a bottle of liquor. But unless I can find that sense of comfort and ease that I sought from alcohol through this process, there's no way I'm going to stay here. You take the bottle away from me, I better find something better. You know, and I truly, truly found that in Alcoholics Anonymous. If someone did to me what I did to myself, I would have killed them. I hate to use that language, but it's true. If someone did to me what I did to others, I probably would have killed them. And when I came in these rooms, you think I wanted to pray? I thought God had been watching. I was bankrupt in those 3 areas, with God, with self, and with others, like most of us. You know, when you really look at the steps by design, steps 1 through 3 recreate and develop a relationship with God. Steps 4 through 7 recreate and develop a relationship with self. Steps 8 and 9 recreate and develop a relationship with others. 10 maintains my relationship with self. 11 maintains my relationship with God. 12 maintains my relationship with others. So coming out of the steps, I'm able to live in harmony in those basic, fundamental relationships. You know, it was good, orderly direction. And eventually, at the other end of the steps, for a lot of us, this became the powerful hand of God. And if God scares you out of these rooms and you're a real alcoholic, don't worry about it. Booze will scare you right back in. You got 2 choices here, like it says in the book. Go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of your intolerable situation. That's choice number 1, door number 1. Or 2, happy, joyous, and free. Now, you think that would be easy, right? You step over to Walmart, do a survey. Happy, joyous, and free. Jails, institutions, and death. No brainer. Step over to your local detox. Step over to the Salvation Army. First thing they say is, well, how bad an alcoholic death? Can I talk to my counselor? So there I am at that turning point. And those 3 relationships with God, with self, and with others. There was a great spiritual teacher. He was asked, of all your teachings, what's the most important? And he said, love God with all thy heart, love thy neighbor as thyself. Doesn't it sound familiar? Built right into the 12 steps. You know, one of the oldest stories in AA is about this little kid. He's like 5 years old, and he wants to play with his dad. It's been around since like the 50s. And Dad's really busy. He's got this 5-year-old kid bugging him. He's trying to figure out a way to occupy this little boy. So he grabs a map of the world out of a magazine. You know, like National Geographic, they have those great maps of the world. He grabs this map of the world and he rips it up into about 50 pieces and he gives it to this little boy and he says, son, here's some tape. What I want you to do is I want you to put this map of the world back together, and when you're done, we'll play. And he's thinking it's going to take this little kid an hour, right? He ripped it up real good. 3 minutes later, little boy's got the whole map of the world all taped back together. It's impossible. The dad says, that's unbelievable, son. How did you do it? And the little boy says, you know, Dad, on the back of the map of the world was a picture of a man. I just put the man back together and the whole world fell into place. And that's the spiritual technology for me of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is a roadmap to spiritual success. Wilson called it spiritual kindergarten. And I'm an expert. I know how to put the map back together. I can get the girl the job in the house in 90 days. And every time I was back in a detox and a bracelet, you know. And what Alcoholics Anonymous showed me was a way to put the man back together. And the whole world fell into place. So if you're new, you know, I hope you're in that place where you're willing to ask for help. That's the dirtiest 4-letter word in this program, is help. And there's some Eskimos around here. So thank you so much for your hospitality. Thank you so much for having me, and enjoy the rest of the weekend.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.